Hi everybody, happy Valentine's Day. In this video, we're going to be talking about all things love and vegan, heartbreak and heart healing. So stick around. Let's do a little self-care practice for Valentine's Day and practice a little bit of vegan witchery. Hi folks, if you're new to the channel, my name is Dr. Corey Wren. I'm a vegan sociologist, I'm a vegan feminist, and I'm a vegan witch. I'm the author of the book, Vegan Witchcraft. And in this book, I have lots of aims with it, but one of the major aims of this book was to bring the principles of witchcraft and nature-based grounding, spirituality for some people, but bring those principles to the vegan community. Because one of the things that I've learned as a sociologist specializing in movement dynamics is, well, first off, people who are new to veganism tend to be really immersed in a lot of heartache as they are being deprogrammed from speciesism, basically, and now starting to see all the violence and oppression that they've been shielded from previously. And it can be a very difficult transition. But I've also seen in my research that people who are long-term vegans, people like myself, and in full disclosure, a lot of this actually was self-directed. I was hoping to find answers just for myself, not just to support the community. But anyway, I found that a lot of long-term vegans like myself have accumulated traumas that come with spending years and years being exposed to the realities of speciesism. And this is one of the reasons I really came back into witchcraft as an adult. Especially when I'm in my 40s now, but in my 30s, I really started to come back to it. One of the reasons is because it's becoming very difficult. The longer you're in veganism, the harder it can be to cope with the reality of it, to cope with the knowledge, and to have this sense of helplessness. So one of the things I was hoping then with vegan witchcraft was to support people in coming up with solutions, however humble they may be, for grappling with the heartbreak that is being vegan in a non-vegan world. So there's a few things I wanted to talk about today. I think the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of survivor grief and accumulated trauma. So there's a study that I did a few years ago about the efficacy of this thing we call, in social movement theory, we call moral shocks. So moral shocks, it's a social movement tactic that really was made famous by the animal rights movement, although other movements also use them. The civil rights movement has used them. The anti-abortion movement has also used them. Basically, the idea of using really shocking imagery or information in order to shock people into becoming involved with the movement, supporting the cause. But why it's really important for the animal rights movement is because, unlike other movements, people who come to animal rights tend to be coming from different places. Whereas, say, by comparison, the anti-abortion movement tends to be church-led, so people who are in the same family, people who are going to the same church, people who are in the same party, so the Republican Party, for instance, conservatives, and the same with civil rights. A lot of the civil rights movement, at least in the 1950s and 60s, was very much so pushed by neighbors, family, churches. Well, animal rights doesn't really have that luxury. People are coming to animal rights because they basically wake up to see the violence that is speciesism. And there is a famous paper from the 90s called Recruiting from Strangers that introduces this concept of moral shocks. And so sociologists were basically arguing that moral shocks are very important for recruitment. And one of the people who authored that paper, by the way, is James Jasper, and he's a very famous social movement scholar. I don't know that he's vegan or vegetarian or anti-speciesist himself, but he's published quite a lot on the animal rights movement and advancing this concept of moral shocks. Now, he also has this idea that moral shocks are not just good for recruitment. He also argues that they are important for maintaining members in the movement and also for continuing to motivate them. And then this is why I think he probably himself is not a vegan or animal rights activist, but was probably using the animal rights movement as a case study, because it was my experience from myself and from my colleagues who are also long-term activists and long-term vegans, that the longer we're in this movement, the less we want to be exposed to moral shocks, the less we want to see these images, the less we want to hear these stories, because they impact us more and more. So the raw wound that is created when we go vegan, that initial raw wound of learning about speciesism, only continues to become more and more tender the older we get. Now, that is not the case for everyone. There are some people that I've definitely noticed a hardening where they're feeling sort of shut down in order for them to go get on with it. And I think that is a lot of the people who have hands-on experience working with non-human animals, so people who work for sanctuaries and kind of have to do that to get on with it. And then there's also the people who kind of get on into higher professionalized positions and become much more detached and rationalistic and budget oriented and all that sort of thing. But for the average activist, kind of like myself, where I'm constantly being exposed to this information and these images, I've noticed that for myself and for my colleagues that we will actively try to manage that because it becomes very difficult. And this is something that I think a lot of people in the movement don't really talk about, because there's a sense of shame, a sense of obligation, if you will, that we need to be constantly learning and constantly exposing ourselves to speciesism. And now for me as a teacher, because I am a university lecturer, I've often felt like it is my duty to be as knowledgeable as possible. And recently I've decided to let that go, because first off, I can never know all there is with speciesism. It's just impossible to know it all. Every day I'm exposed to things unconsentingly. Every day I'm exposed to some new horror that I never even would have imagined. And it just is, over the years, I've realized that the ways that animals are harmed is so infinite that I could never possibly know. And so I've had to kind of concede that I won't ever know it all, and I won't be an expert in how animals suffer. And sadly, I also have to concede that that may be a job for people who are more in closer proximity to that. So just for instance, it was a major turning point in my career and individual life when I watched a documentary on the dairy industry in India. It's I can't remember the name right now, and I'm not even going to Google it because I don't want, it was so traumatizing for me to see that. It was kind of like if you've ever seen the movie Earthlings. I really was extremely psychologically disturbed when I first saw Earthlings, and I felt like this duty that I needed to watch it. At the time, I think I was like 19 or 20, and I was already vegan, but I was working with a student rights organization, and I was the vice president or whatever, and then they put on the screening of this film and didn't tell me what it was, and I felt obligated to sit there and watch it because I'm part of the organizing leadership committee, and it was extremely traumatizing. I remember that this was 20 years ago now, but I remember being like bedridden for days after that. It was so horrible, and to this day, those images are still in my brain. I could still remember those things. And so the same thing happened more recently, now that I'm an adult. Well, I was an adult then, but you know what I mean? I'm more mature now, and I've been doing this for a lot longer. But I came across this new documentary on the dairy industry in India, and I felt obligated to watch it because, first off, as a feminist scholar, I think it's important to know not just what's happening to animals here in the West, but what's happening globally. And obviously what's happening in India is not unrelated to colonialism and Western influence. But also because a lot of my students will come into my animal class and just say, yeah, but in India, everybody respects cows and loves cows. And so, well, that's factually untrue, because India is one of the biggest beef producers in the world and one of the biggest dairy producers and leather producers in the world. So that's patently false. So I felt like I needed to watch this so I could understand it more and then be able to teach better. And it was a similar situation to Earthlings, where I was just like, it buckled me at the knees, and I was just psychologically really disturbed for many, many, many days. And I had to make a lot of changes after that point. And one of the changes was I no longer sit at the table with people who are eating animals. I can't do it anymore. And I can go into a whole nother video, maybe I will one day, about the tactical issues, the strategies around sitting at the table with people who eat animals or not. But I can't do that in today's video. It'll just go on too long. But what I want to talk about, though, is this idea of survivor guilt, because that is the other reason that we expose ourselves to this. It's not just that we won't feel like obligated to know more, to learn more. I think we also inherently are pushing ourselves to be exposed to this because we feel like that we're in some kind of position of privilege, that we are not in that position that the non-human animal is in, and thereby it's our duty to bear witness. And again, like, I don't have the space in this video to go into all the ethics and philosophies about why that may or may not be useful, but the reality is that many of us are sitting with this concept, this reality, this phenomenon of survivor guilt, and it weighs on us, right? This idea that we feel helpless. That's another word that came up in my research quite a lot through my interviews. People were saying they felt helpless. And then the other big word that came out quite a lot in my research was the word trauma. And I didn't expect this. I expected that people would be self-regulating and not exposing themselves to images, which was true. But I didn't expect how many people would come forward and start talking about the sense of helplessness and the sense of feeling traumatized. And one of the things that fuels trauma is that sense of helplessness. So it's one thing to know about really horrible stuff. It's another thing to know about horrible stuff and have a sense of you can't do anything to intervene or to alleviate that suffering. And so it's just suffering for suffering's sake. And of course, that's not true, right? We're activists. If you're watching this video, if you made it this far, I assume that you are an activist, or you incorporate somehow. A lot of people don't like the label activist, but you incorporate somehow advocating for animals in your day-to-day life. Let's put it that way. And if you're watching this and you're plant-based or vegan, like, that's something that counts. Just by existing as a vegan in the world, you are a living protest. But nonetheless, we feel this sense of obligation because of the survivor guilt. And another thing I think a lot of activists underappreciate is that probably a lot of us are running on secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is a real phenomenon that happens when you are not firsthand exposed to the traumatic events, such as what's happening to non-human animals, but you are being exposed to that secondarily by watching the videos, reading about it, being immersed in it. And the way that the brain works, the brain, an empathetic brain in the human being, feels the same pain as though they were present there. Our brain, we've actually have neuroscience that supported this. Our brain, the same pain parts of our brain light up in mirroring what we're witnessing, observing, reading, whatever. And so secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, it's probably a lot more prevalent in the animal rights community than people realize. And so one of the things that witchcraft offers is just basic daily practices that we can do to keep us mindful, to keep us in check, and to validate what we're feeling, basically. So I'm a doctor of sociology. I'm not a doctor of trauma. I'm not a therapist by any means. But what I'm advocating today as a long-term vegan, as a social science researcher, as a feminist, I'm advocating here this concept of taking self-care seriously. You have to take care of yourself. You have to legitimate your feelings and not feel pressured to expose yourself to things that harm you or trigger you. Within reason, right? We have to be activists and we have to be exposed to a certain degree, but also forcing ourselves to watch slaughterhouse videos when we know what it's going to do to us psychologically is probably not going to be helpful, because there's only so much information you really need to know. Ultimately, what vegans are doing is asking folks to acknowledge that non-human animals are persons. They care what happens to them, and therefore they have a right to bodily autonomy, respect, and dignity. And you don't need to go and see how crocodile skin is made. You don't need to go and see what's happening in the space vivisection laboratories. You don't need to go see how cashmere is. You don't need to go see every single instance of how speciesism is enacted in order to stay with that basic principle that non-human animals are sentient beings who care what happens to them, and therefore they deserve respect, dignity, and bodily autonomy. So how does this relate to Valentine's Day? So Valentine's Day is this great big celebration of love, right? And compassion, and usually very anthropocentric. My partner makes fun of me because I bring it beyond heterosexual, like romantic love, and actually use it to celebrate lots of things. My mom and I send Valentine's Day cards to each other, for instance. And I oftentimes send them to my friends as well, because I think it's a day just to spread love in general. You don't need to kind of support heteropatriarchy all the time. So we can, as vegans, then see Valentine's Day as a day to celebrate multi-species love and the compassion that vegans have for other species, for fellow animals. And that is a radical act. It's a radical act to practice self-care in a system that is destroying us. It's a radical act to practice love and compassion for other species in a system that is alienating us from nature and from fellow animals. So why don't we try this for this Valentine's Day? Let's do a little ritual then. A simple ritual that you can do at any time to remind yourself that you matter, that caring for yourself and loving yourself is important and valid. Yeah. A little simple spell to refocus your energies. A really simple spell to spread love wherever it is needed. So for this very simple self-love ritual, I have 3 ingredients, all of which are optional. Like I said, magic at the end of the day is just intention, right? So the first thing you would need is a vegan candle. Pink is the color for self-love, for compassion. Yeah. So we're going to use a pink candle. I've also got a whole lot of roses to add some sweetness. Roses, of course, are the flower of Valentine's Day. So we'll add a little of that, basically some potpourri, and it's infused with all the magic of roses. And then the last thing is a little bit more controversial, but bringing in some crystals. I say controversial because the crystal trade is deeply ecocidal for the most part. I don't even know where I got these rose quartz crystals. They were gifted to me 20, maybe even 30 years ago. I've had them so long, I don't even know where they came from. And I think they're magic because through all the moves that I've had throughout my life, they've survived with me. I just felt like needed to keep them. But rose quartz is the crystal du jour for self-love. So if you have rose quartz around, bring it into practice. If not, don't worry about it. It is a relatively affordable one because it's super common. But if you don't have any of this, by all means, don't go out and buy it. I think it's always better to just let them come to you because they always do, Lord knows. Okay, let's set up. All right, so you want to begin with a safe dish, right? Just to catch the wax, but also because we're going to decorate with our flowers. If you work with tarot cards or oracle cards, this might be a nice time to bring them in. You don't have to do this, but the symbolism, the visual imagery that go with them oftentimes kind of help you to set your intention, get you in the right headspace. So I am using my Witch's Oracle today. And this deck doesn't really have much on love, but it does have, I went through, and sometimes I just go and see what's intuitive to me. Well, first off, we got passion, fire, because while a lot of this video thus far, I've been talking a lot about despair and grief and guilt and all that sort of thing. At the end of the day, why are we still doing what we do? And why are we still vegan and still advocating despite all the turmoil that it causes in our personal life and beyond? And that's because within us, we have a fierce love, don't we? A passion even. So drawing then on the Oracle card here for fire and passion, I thought that would be fitting. And then also because one of the things I think is special about vegan witchcraft is that we call on this very old legacy of meaningful relationships with fellow animals. Non-human animals are not always oppressed by us, right? So we can also focus on the positive relationships that humans have with fellow animals. And so we can think about maybe the companion animals that we are taking care of now, that we have a special bond with, and call on them for some support. So here the familiar card is asking us to consider us as guardians, but also it's a reciprocal relationship, isn't it? Because non-human animals are also guardians for us in a lot of ways. Okay, so I'm going to put these on my altar, but for the purposes of the video, I'll set them here, okay? So I would put them in a place where you can see them and think about them. Let's sit here so you can see them, okay? Now, if you have any kind of oil you'd like to charge your candle with, you can. I have tons, but I'm going to stick with just the bare candle today. But before we get started, we're going to have to infuse this with our good intentions, okay? So thinking very deeply on multi-species Happy Valentine's Day, where there's so much love and compassion abounding. It's saturating the world, and there's just so much. There's way more than anyone could possibly need. There's plenty to go around. Infusing that with our candle. So much love. There's so much compassion. It's infinite. It's an infinite resource. Okay. So we'll put that here. And so also as we bring our roses into this, the smell is going to activate that intention. And all the beautiful power and magic that goes into roses. So imagining them in that field, catching the sunlight, catching the raindrops, all the love that they represent, and all the love that we want to give back to ourselves and to fellow animals. Bring in a crystal if you're using one, and infuse this as well, and just drawing on, thinking about the solidness, the steadiness of the earth that continues to turn, that continues to support us, that continues to energize us, even when we're feeling so down and so lost and astray, remembering that the earth has our back. So now, my sweet vegan friends, we'll light our candle to bring that intention into fruition. Wishing love and compassion for non-human animals everywhere. Wishing love and compassion for vegans everywhere. Wishing love and compassion for those who are not yet vegan and maybe never will be. That's an unfortunate injustice to them as well. So we'll let this candle burn down and feel all the love emitting from that, from nature, from the earth, from our animals, from our own determined spirit. And from my little witchy house to yours, I'm wishing you such a happy Valentine's Day and all the love and compassion in the world, in the universe. Hang in there. I know it's not easy.